and then we're going to just another pin just at the bottom of the bodice just to hold it together. That's just a really short seam, but that's just where we need to go. If you need any more down this straight edge of the sleeve, then go ahead and put some more pins in. And then we're going to take it to the machine, start here, reverse stitch all the way to here. I'm going to stop right on top of my stitching wherever I put my sleeve in and pivot to change direction, because you've got a bit of a right angle to go through down here and across, so we need to pivot and then come across. Okay, that's what I'm going to do next. Okay, so a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back, and then we're going to sew along the underarm seam with our 1/4 inch seam allowance, going right up to where we can see that stitching line was for inserting the sleeve. And then we're going to leave our needle in our work, we're going to pivot, straighten out this section here, and then we're going to carry on down to the waist seam and reverse at the end. Middle out of the work. And there we go, we've got our underarm seam sewn. So let's go and do that on the other side as well. And then we'll be working, I think, on the skirt. So we've now got both of our sleeves sewn together. What I want you to do is just split that seam allowance and then get a hand sewing needle and thread, put a knot at the end, and just take a few stitches to hold that seam allowance to the side. I'm just going to sew it just down onto the other seam allowance for the sleeve, because otherwise you get quite a bulky end of a seam, and then it just makes it look messy sometimes. So just catch that seam allowance down just so that it can't stay flat. And when we put this on Clara, if I do one side and show you, then you'll see why we do it this way, or why I do it this way anyway. Then onto this, just make sure you get all the raw edges of your lace tucked under. So if you've got any, like I've got a bit of threads there, I'm just going to tuck those under as well, and we'll need to knot off while we're there. You can get a liquid called Fray Check, and you can always use some of that if you think that it's going to unravel. But if you catch it down with your seam allowance, just make sure you go over the end of your lace as well. And that should just hold that down for you and just keep it nice and neat. Just a little extra step, but it's just these little bits that just can elevate your sewing sometimes. So let's just pop that there. Just turn this sleeve round the other way. And the other thing that I want you to do as well is, I'm going to have to be brave on this bit, is do a little snip. So where you've got the little right angle, I want you to just do a little snip under the arm and just snip up to, but not through, the stitches at that underarm point, because that will help the sleeve sit right when it's actually on and turned through properly. Where's my thread? That's it. So this one we've turned through, so I'll just put that through to the right side. So when you look down the end, can you see how those bits of the seam allowance are lying flat? I just turn through the other one that I've not done yet. Pull the lace through nicely. Can you see how? I'll get the edge of the hem of the sleeve all right first, so I'll show you properly. But can you see when you look down the sleeve, you can see all that seam allowance all sticking up all messy. So that's why I just do mine. As I say, it just takes a few seconds, but it's just when your character's wearing the dress, it just makes all that difference. And that underarm seam is now laid flat. So let me just tuck this one back. Hopefully you've done both of yours already. Let me just hand stitch this down, and then we'll be on to attaching our skirt. Okay, so here's our bodice looking all lovely with our lace edged trimmed sleeves, all looking nice, and that collar is going to sit down all beautifully. I haven't understitched the collar. I think it's going to be too fiddly to do on this small garment, but we'll talk about that. If ever you follow any of my videos for making children's or adults' clothes, then understitching features quite a lot, but on this small one for Clara I don't think it's going to matter so much. Okay, So the next thing then that we're going to need to do is on the lining is you're just going to attach these two bits of lining together. So can you see how that's the sleeve, the arm side without the sleeve in? There's the top shoulder seam. We're just going to put those two edges together. And then we're just going to sew down that just in 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can pin this if you want to. But literally just to make that bodice into the right shape that it needs to be. A couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back. Do the same on the other side too. That all neatens that all off together. Because then the next thing is we're going to be working with our skirt and start and put on this beautiful skirt. But all of those steps for the bodice and for the sleeves are exactly the same as you would do for a child's or an adult's dress of the same design. So you do learn some very useful and transferable skills when you're working on these miniature ones. And on the seam allowance here, let's just open that up and just finger press that open. And the same under the sleeve, under the arms, we did that really tiny seam, didn't we? Let's just finger press those open as well. Okay. So the next thing that I want you to do is the underarm seam of the front bodice, which has got the sleeves in. Just put those two seams together so that you create a crease in the centre front. And I would then just put a pin with the top going up towards the waist edge down that crease. We just want that centre point marked because we want to make sure that we're getting even gathers all the way around this skirt. So the same thing on our skirt, we're going to put our two raw edges together where we've got our gathering threads. Put those together. Find your halfway point and let's put a pin down the centre of that just to mark that. And then I want you to take the raw edges to the folded edge again, so we're folding it into quarters, and I want you to put a pin in again just through one part of the fabric and just open it out, find your place again, and then just put a pin the other side. So what we've actually got is we've quartered this skirt. Get that pin in properly. So it's still open at the moment, it's still one long strip, but now we've got a pin 1/4 of the way in from the edge, half the way across, 3/4 of the way across. Because what we're going to do now is turn our bodice round, and we want right side bodice and right side skirt together. Find your halfway point and match that to the centre front, so those two pins go together. And then take the pins out and just replace it with one just in that same place. That's got that fabric together. Find your quarter pin and put that at your underarm seam and just pin that on top of your underarm seam, and then go to the other side to your 3/4 marked place and mark that as well onto your other underarm seam with your pin that you had. Then you're going to grab another pin and you're going to find the place where the back of your bodice is, where the edge of the collar is, and you're going to have to fold over, oops, get my threads out of the way. You're going to have to fold over I'll just say just over 1/4 inch. And then that's going to have a pin, and you want the folded edge of that 1/4 inch just on the transition where that seam allowance is at the back there. So there's my seam allowance for the back of the bodice between the lining and the main. And then put a pin in there. And then go across to the side. And again, just fold in that just over 1/4 inch. And then put this section of the bodice onto there. So what we've done is we've attached the skirt. It's all loopy at the moment, that's how it should be at the moment. You've got all of these loops of fabric in between your pins. Clear some space so you can see. So when we look at the dress from the other side, we can see the waist seam. We've got our two sleeves here, and this is the waist seam, and this is our hemmed edge, okay? So if we just turn everything upside down, then you can see that from one edge of the bodice, not the lining, because the lining is going to neaten away. I'm keeping the lining out of the way at the moment. All the way along to the other side, the skirt has got these loops in, because we're going to gather that in a second. So, and I've turned in that edge there because we're going to sew that at the end, but it's easier on these smaller garments to work with it in what they call in the flat like this, but we'll join this hem edge shortly, but not just yet. So then we're going to find our threads, which are our gathering threads. And just using a, unpick until you're at the quarter edge mark away from the edge of the skirt, so that we're not gathering that edge that we've just folded in. So just taking those back, just take one more stitch out there, I think, and that will just careful not to break your threads with your quick unpick. So there's my two from one side, and there's my two from the other. So I'm going to hold on to my threads, and then I'm going to hold on to my fabric with my finger and thumb and pull on the threads while holding the fabric still, and that will start to put gathers in the skirt. And as we pull along, we can pull those gathers along to where the pins are, but magically, if you hold on to the thread still, you can pull those gathers past the pins. And we want to gather that up towards the centre point, because we're going to do from each side in. So just keep pulling and you'll gather that up. Again, watch the bodice video if you're not sure about gathering, not the bodice, the bonnet. So we're going to take all of it, so then we can let go of these threads now, this long thread that we've just been pulling, because we can now manipulate these gathers with our fingernails just up to that centre pin. And we want the bodice edge, can you see the bodice edge just there, and this gathered edge to be the same length. So I know I've got to add some more gathers in because it's not quite long enough yet, so let's just add some more, tighten that up a bit more. Oh, now I've gone too far, look, because now the bodice edge is longer. So now I can just pull out some of those gathers. Make sure your gathers go right up to your pin, because you don't want a bald spot right at the centre front. And then when you've got that ready, you're going to take another pin and just put it in the middle of, and you're going to pin the gathers in between, so that your bodice edge is flat. That's the bodice edge, and that's the gathers. If we look round from the other side, we can see we've got a gathered edge here and a flat edge there, and that's perfect how it should be. Okay. So then let's go back onto the inside of our dress again, find our long threads that we were gathering with. And now we're going to go on to the next section. So this is from the underarm out to the back, and we're going to make sure that we've got that all gathered up, but that they two lengths, the bodice bit between those two pins and the skirt bit between those two pins is the same length, and we're going to put another pin in just there. Okay, so that's done for that side now. So now we're going to come over to the other side, and look how much different it looks. Look at all those gathers all in the fold there, and we've still got our loops just here. So again, let's undo those couple of stitches just to the edge of the gather it to the edge where we folded it under. Make sure you don't break your thread, because we want to keep those threads intact. Okay. So you need the two from the top or the two from the bottom. Let me just take that thread out because it's going over the edge. I don't want it going over the edge. Okay, hold on to our two threads together. You've got to hold those two threads together from each side. So one from each row of your stitching, and then pull on it while holding onto your fabric, and that will gather that all up for you and start to take out that excess fabric and form all of these beautiful gathers. Again, we want to go past a pin, so hold on to the gathers and we'll jump across past the pin. And we can just smooth all of these gathers through to that centre pin. Just keep pulling. Careful not, if your thread keeps snapping, you're either pulling too hard, or just test your thread by finding a length of it and give it a pull. Your thread needs to be quite strong, because if you've had your thread in the sunshine or through the light through a window, sometimes it can mean that your thread will perish a little bit, and you won't know any different until you actually start trying to do something like gathering with it, and it's not got the strength in it then that it needs to hold those stitches for you. So let's just straighten up these gathers towards the centre, so we're not going to have a flat patch on the centre front. And again, we want to just manipulate these gathers until both edges of those bodice are the same. So again, once you've got that right, put in as many pins as you are happy with and comfortable with to hold all of those gathers in place. Just use your fingernails just to make sure that you've got all your gathers equal. And gathering is one of those things you just have to keep practicing at it, and your gathering will get neater and neater as time goes on, and you'll start to be able to spot where you've got more gathers and where you haven't. So mine weren't quite even just there, so let me just put my finger between the two, just coax them down a bit more, that's better. Put the pin back in again. Okay, that's holding there. And then to this section here, that's nice and gathered there. Happy with that, it's nice and flat. And then put the pin through there. So if we look at this, we've got our lining edge all still loose. That's one side of our lining, and that's the side without the sleeves in. But the body side with the sleeves in now has got this beautiful skirt all gathered onto it. So the next thing then is what we're going to do is we're going to kind of push this out a bit so that we can work on sewing all of the bodice edge. And we want that to be nice and flat and no puckers in there at all. So just make sure you've not pinned any puckers into your bodice edge. And then when you're ready, we can go to the sewing machine. Now, I've opened out the bodice to be flat at the side of the skirt. So the skirt finishes here. That's our turn over the bit that I've done. There's the bottom of our lace look. So I turned that over and we're going to sew that up later. But where the lining meets the bodice there, just have that pulled open so that you can start right on the edge of your skirt. And you're kind of going to push your skirt into your bodice so that you can work with it. You want that bit to be flat where we start. And you're going to sew so that you're stitching in between your two rows of your gathering. So let's do a couple of stitches forward. I'm just going to take that pin out because we're right on top of it. And a couple of stitches back. And then our needling our work. So again, I just want to just have a quick look underneath. Just have a quick look underneath. Make sure everything's all lying all nice and flat. And just make sure that your bodice and your skirt, all of your gathers want to be at right angles to where you're going to sew across. So just keep pulling your skirt that way. And then let's start sewing across. Needling your work so you can stop and manipulate your pins and take those out as you get to them. Just keep having a little look. Just make sure all of your gathers are lying nice and straight. And again, gathers lying nice and straight. Pins out. And then again, we're going to have to just pull some of this lining back from behind the needle to the front so we can run off nice and neatly. Not quite there yet. Keep going through your gathers. But you'll start and see that you'll start and pull your lining, your bodice lining towards the front to help that. If you can't quite reach your pin head, just lift up your presser foot until you can get to it. And then here we're going to run off. So there's this is my lining part just here, and I'm pulling that forward, and we're sewing that folded edge across. Just keep your gathering threads out of the way if you can, just so that we're not sewing over those any more than we need to. We're going to go right up to the edge, and then reverse at the edge of the skirt where it's going to be in that seam allowance between the centre back bodice. Take our threads out. Snip through the threads, just put the machine to one side and have a little look. So the first thing I want to do is have a look along my bodice edge. That's the gathered edge, and that's the inside bodice edge. So we can see that we've got no puckers on that section, no puckers along the centre front, and no puckers along the bottom, so I'm happy with that. I would check that first before you take your gathering stitches out. And then I just have a little look on my gathered edge to make sure that I've not got my skirt caught up anywhere and that that's all sewn nicely, and it is. So once I'm happy with that, then we can go to our gathering stitches, and I separate out just one of the top threads first. Oh, that's my starting threads. Let's just take off those starting threads. And again, this is where it's helpful to have a different colour for your gathering thread so you can see where you are. And then we're going to pull all the way through on one of our top ones. That's got one out. And then let's do the other one. Get the bottom thread, the long one, and then we're going to pull. See, it's broken halfway through, but don't worry, take that one out, that's fine. And then let's find the bottom threads as well. Whereabouts are they? There as well. So one should come out straight away, and that's going to get, it just means that we've gone over it slightly with our stitching. And then there should be another one as well, which is there, which will come straight out. So when your threads breaks like that, just go to the other side and then just give it a tug and just see if you can pull it out, and it's come straight out for me, so that's fine. And then again, that one's just come straight out, so that's fine. If it didn't, just snip it close to where the threads are, because it just means that you've stitched through the gathering thread with your top stitching, your construction stitching. So there we go, there's our skirt onto our dress. Lovely and full, isn't it? That's got a real nice presence to it, body to it. So we need to neaten off the inside now. So put the two side seams together and just find that centre point. I can just put a little notch in the front there just to find it. Got it. Right, let's get our ironing board back in again. And we want our seam gauge and some pins, because I'm just going to turn under 1/4 inch on this bodice lining edge. Just put a pin in to hold it in place. And just hold your seam allowances open on your bodice. Oops, sorry, I'm off camera. Just doing what we've done before. Seam allowance on the underarm of the lining open. And let's just make sure that's 1/4 inch and put a pin in there. 1/4 inch in the centre front. Yep. And then 1/4 inch on the edge here. Seam allowance is open. And then just press that edge just to give us a starting point so that we know where we are. Take the pins out. And then now we're going to work on the side bodices, and we're just going to turn under 1/4 inch there as well. Watch me burn my fingers now, I'm not using pins. That's that one done. And that should just run nicely onto the front bodice piece as well. Just use pins if you need to, just so that you don't... I managed not to burn myself, but it was a close call. Just fold that under. Okay. Because then the next thing that's going to happen is where your side seam of your bodice is under your arms, you're going to find the side seam under your bodice of your sleeves, and you're going to put that as on top neatly as you can do. Can be a little bit tricky, and then just put a pin in. And on the side centre back here, you're going to fold over the seam allowance, and then you're going to fold it in so that you've got a lovely transition there between the back of the bodice and onto the skirt. Make sure that's all nice. And put a pin in there. I can't have my side seams right on top of each other because I've got a little tuck there, because these should all match nicely. So we've got a lovely transition there, can you see, between the bodice and the back of the skirt. Still not sewn the skirt together yet, don't worry about that, we'll do that in a minute. So that's nice. But what we're doing is we're pushing all of the seam allowance of the gathered edge all inside the bodice. Let's go to the other side again and I'll show you before I've done that side seam. So there's the transition between the gathered edge of the skirt and the lining. It's all folded under. So if you kind of straighten it out so that you've got a straight edge on between your skirt and your bodice, and hold it in with your thumb, you should be able to then fold over your lining over the top of those gathers so that it encases all of that seam allowance. And then you're going to put a line so that the folded line of your bodice is on the stitch line. You can see just there is on the stitch line of the skirt. And then just by going along, following the folded edge onto the stitch line of the skirt, you should be able to put in a couple more pins, and that should all sit nice and neatly. And this is why it's important to have your correct seam allowances, even if it's not an exact 1/4 inch, so long as it's consistent all the way through stitching your garments, then your lining will sit nicely inside the rest of your dress. So there we go. So I've just got that all folded down just along there. So now I'm going to take my needle and thread, hand sewing needle and thread, and I'm just going to slip stitch this closed with using the stitched line of the skirt at the waist as being the reference for that edge just there. Only needs to be single, it doesn't need to be double thread. So let's put a 1/4 knot in here. Glasses needed because it's quite fine stitching. And if we take a first stitch alongside the gathers and just run our thread through those gathers first and come out right on that edge, then that will bury our knot, and we can just use the point of our needle just to tuck the end of the thread in. And now I'm going to go through the stitches on the waist edge and just do a couple of stitches in place just to hold that all together. So that's just anchored that knot and that thread. And now going through where my machine stitches are and then through the edge of the folded edge of the bodice lining, we're just going to stitch down the back of this dress, this bodice lining down. And just take the pins out as you come to them so you don't get all tangled up. Just watch your fingers that you don't get. You can usually hold it with your finger and thumb, and it normally will sit fairly well for you. You've got a little bit of room for manoeuvre because of the gathers. That will hide some of your stitches, but you try not to have your stitches visible on the other side of your dress. So that should look all nice and neat on that side. You're just catching it down together really. But it's going to give you that lovely neat finish on the inside where you don't see any of the gathering from your dress. Take that pin out as we come to it. But just you're best to pin it before you start stitching, because it's very easy for you to take in too much of the bodice top, and you when you're stitching along here, and then you'll get to the other end and there won't be enough bodice lining to stitch your gathered skirt to. That's why you need to just tack it down first, so that pin it down first so that you've got it all together. And when I get to my underarm, I normally do a double stitch just to hold that together. And then we're going to carry on then past into the centre point here. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on going all the way through. I'm going to do another double stitch at the centre front of the bodice, just so that it's like a lock stitch, again at the underarm seam, and then we're going to come out at the other end. So if you want to hand stitch your bodice lining together, and then the other thing that we'll do is we'll neaten off these arm size. Well, we'll do that in a second. I'll show you how I do that to make that neat too, and then we'll sew at the back seam. Okay, so there's our neat inside of our garment. Got a little few threads, just rogue threads around and about. The next thing I want to do is just tuck down, just connect the underarm seams here for our bodice, because we just want to be able to have that sort of neat so it doesn't sort of flap around at all. And there's two ways of doing it. There's an easy way and a difficult way, as you might imagine, and especially with such a small round armhole here as well, arm size they call it. One way is that you just find the centre top of your lining shoulder seam and the centre top of your lining shoulder seam and put those two together and just put a pin in just to hold that together for now. And then you kind of do the same with your underarm as well. Now I know I tucked my lining down into my bodice, but all you're going to do is just do a few little over stitches just over the edge here, just attaching your main bodice, your sleeve edge seam allowance and your main bodice together in order just to stitch that together. And just do as much as you can. You can't go all the way round, but just get as far as you can, and then that will just tuck it through into the inside when Clara's wearing her dress. And especially if your character isn't being undressed at all and is just for display purposes, then you don't need to worry too much about it. Otherwise, what you can do is take your lining. It's going to seem a little bit scary, and we're going to cut into what we think would be the seam allowance just by 1/4 of an inch, maybe just under, and you're just going to do some little snips in your lining only all the way around. Just to about the 1/4 of an inch point, maybe just a smidge less. A smidge in English terms is just a little bit. Because then what you're going to do then is you're going to finger press that underneath to the inside to give you a folded seam edge, and you can just use your fingers just to finger press that out. And then with your bodice, you're going to push your bodice, your sleeve head and your bodice inside your dress. And you're going to then have your seam allowances on top of each other, your seams on top. And this is why I say this is the trickier way of doing it. It just depends what you like. But that's going to give you a folded edge like we had for the bodice. And we're then going to sew the folded edge to the stitch line for the sleeves. It's a little bit fiddly to try and show you, but hopefully you can see there. There's the folded edge. Let me use my quick and pick up a second. There's the folded edge from where I've turned under the seam allowances. There's little snips, look, in the bodice lining, and that's been folded under to give us a folded edge, and there's the stitch line for my sleeves. Just got to manipulate the fabric all the way around, and that should then give you an edge that you can then stitch that lining down to, and that'll just neaten and enclose those seam allowances again and just make it nice and neat for you. So 2 different ways of doing it. Depends on, it'll be easier on the 16-inch dolls of clothes obviously because they're bigger. But that's one way that you can do it. It's usually the point of your needle, your pin, just to sweep under any fabric that's poking out. And then you're just going to do a slip stitch around there. Just make sure you don't catch your sleeve at all. You just onto that stitched edge, almost go underneath the stitch of the stitched edge, and that will then neaten that off for you. And do that on both sides. And then we'll come back to sew the back edge of the skirt together. Okay, so if you do tuck it in and underneath, that's how the kind of finish you can get. It's not my neatest work because it's just so tiny, but it does the job. It just neatens that edge and just allows for that dress to be put on and to be worn and to be lovely and neat from the inside. Okay, so the next stage then that we're going to do now is going to work with the hem of our dress, and we're going to put the 2 bottom pieces of our lace together and put a pin in there. Just make sure they're even because you want that to be a nice transition. And then you're going to fold out as much as you can of the back of your dress in order to then put the raw edges together where you neatened them previously. And you're going to go up, you know, sort of up till about 1 inch away from the top of your dress and put a pin in just there. So there's the bodice, there's the edge of the bodice, and I'm about 1 inch down just on there. And then what we're going to do is get our sewing machine. I'm just on a straight stitch. I'm just moving my stitch length back to give me a 6.5 to give me a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And then we're going to start on the bottom just here. A couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back. Make sure you go right off the edge so you've got that nicely transitioned. and then needle in your work. I've taken out the first pin as you saw. Raw edges together, I'm just doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance just at the back of the dress until we get to our pin here. We could put that as a red pin, couldn't we, to tell us that we needed to stop. Just make sure that you're not going to sew any gathers in, you want that to be nice and flat. And then just reverse at the top. Take your needle out of the work, that's my snips. Take our starting threads off. So that just joined that back seam of that skirt together. The next thing that I want you to do is just open out that seam allowance and just finger press it with your finger so that it's nice and flat. You take it over to your ironing board and iron it. And we're just going to put a few stitches in just to hold this seam allowance flat, because I don't want that poking out at the back of the dress either. I want that to be nice and flat. So for this one, I'm just going to sew up just slightly in. So it'll be on the lace edge, so we won't see it. So let's just go on to where the lace is. A couple of stitches up. You've got to be careful because you've got your lace there, so it's going to be quite thick. I'll just snip those threads off. So that's just got, you can see how one side is poking up and the other side's nice and flat now. So let's just get the other side to lie nice and flat too. Just an up and down should be enough just to hold that down for you. And that's what it looks like from the outside. You can't really see it, especially with the colour of that lace. I just need to trim some of these threads off a little bit. They've just not quite flush with the stitching, just to neaten that off. And here we have our dress for now. So the next thing that we need to be doing now is working out, so as the dress as it's worn, with the girl normally you'd put the right side over the left side, so we're going to overlap it just slightly, one over the other. We're going to match our waist seam and we're going to match our top seam, because we're going to stitch some press studs on the back here. Now if you go into your little haberdashery pack in here, we've got some little buttons in there, but you can't, unless you're a really good expert, much better than me, I wouldn't even attempt to make some buttonholes. You can possibly hand stitch some buttonholes if you wanted to, but I think these 3 buttons are intended just to be decorative. So I've just got those out of my haberdashery pack. Oops, don't lose my beads. Just pop those back in there with all the other bits of haberdashery. It's getting much emptier now that we're moving our way down her outfit. Let me just get some press studs so that I can show you, and then we're just going to sew some press studs onto the back of the dress. So these are the press studs that I use. They're a size 000 and they're about 5mm. And they're small enough to use and to stitch on. You can get smaller ones, but you've got to just bear in mind how easy it is to lose them. And they will go underneath the buttons. But I think that what I'm going to do first is sew on the buttons first, because with that we need to go in and out. And then with these we can sew over the edge, and I'll show you how we sew over the edge in the end. So I've got my hand sewing needle threaded up with a pink thread. Just make sure that your needle will actually go through the holes on the button before you start to stitch. And what I'm going to do, we're going to do one at the top and one at the bottom, and then we'll guesstimate the other one. And I'm sewing, as I've got the dress towards me, I'm sewing on the buttons on the right hand side, because that's going to overlap over onto the left. And so I'm going to just take my needle in a bit of a way away from the actual button placement itself, and then I'm going to come through on the inside of the garment. So you'll see that my knot will be quite a way away from where I'm actually going to be stitching, because I don't want the knot to be shown on the other side. So there's my knot there down the end. And now where I want this button to go, I'm just going to take a couple of stitches through the fabric without the button being in place, because that now anchors that thread down, and if we lift our knot and take some of the thread out, we can snip that off, and that gives us a nice long tail inside our dress without you seeing the knot. I'm going to take our button and see if there's a right side or a wrong side. There is, so we've got a little bit of a dome and a little bit of a flat. And now all I do is just put my button onto my needle in and out. So I don't try and position it in place just now. I've just got it sort of threaded onto my thread. And now I'm going to go back to my dress now and take a little stitch in the dress, and then that will cinch the button onto the back of the dress for me. Just make sure I've got a little bit of a loop there. Let's make sure we don't have any loops. I'm going to have all of my holes going across the back of the dress, so at a right angle. So this time I'm going to go in and through the button on the dress. Just pull it tight, and then going back in through the other side again. And that will then start and attach this button onto the back of the dress. So it's not going to be a functioning button, it's just decorative purposes. Make sure we go through the holes. And the more times you go through with your thread, the tighter it could get for your needle to go through. So just be aware of that. And it just needs to be attached on quite securely. But as this isn't a toy, these dolls aren't a toy because of these small parts, then I don't need to worry that it's going to be not robust enough. And then when I'm happy that that's sewn on, I'm going to just go to the inside of the dress and take a couple of stitches just through the stitches that I've done on the inside of the dress only, just so that that kind of knots off the thread. And then just where those threads are, I'm just going to go through one side of the, through one side of the fabric, and I'm going to run my needle down in between the two sides of the fabric. So you can't see the needle on the outside, and you can't see the needle on the inside, but then come out a little way down, so you've got about an inch left. Got my sleeve cord has been circled. And then I'm just going to cut that thread off there, and that then gives me a nice long tail inside the dress, and I don't need to worry about those threads and undoings. There's one button sewn on. So I'm going to sew the next one down near the waist just here in exactly the same way, and then I'm going to put one right in the middle because there's 3 buttons. That'll give us our 1, 2, 3 on the back of the dress. I'm not putting any on the skirt because once we've got these press studs on and got it overlapped slightly, then I don't think you need one on the skirt. That would be my suggestion, but obviously it's your design choice, so you can choose what you want to do. Right, I'm just going to put these other 2 buttons on in exactly the same way, and I'll come back to you when we're going to sew the press studs on. Okay, so I've got my 3 buttons sewn on there. I've just looked at the instructions, and Claire in her instructions said to lap the left over the right, and I've done the right over the top of the left. So it's a doll dress. It doesn't matter. Whichever you prefer, you can go with. So that's all fine. Doesn't look like that's turned out quite enough in that corner. Just got that bodice point isn't quite where I wanted it to be. Okay, so let's sew a snap on the top of this one. So I'm going to just put 2 snaps on. I think that'll be plenty for holding the dress on. So I've got changed over to a cream thread to match my dress. I'm going to do the same thing with the knot and take the knot in through the lining only, not through the top of the dress. And then I'm going to come out just underneath where the first button was sewn on. So there you can see there's no needle through there, and then that'll just give that little section there. And I'm just going to go through where the back of the button was sewn just a couple of times just to anchor that thread down, and then we can just pull on the knot and snip it off and take that off. That gives us a nice neat finish start. And then I'm going to put the domed section on the back of the button. So again, we're going to put the needle through the hole in the edge of the press stud, and then position that underneath that button, and then you want to take with you, it's really difficult to show you, but you've got that just holding it on the underneath of the button, and then you're going to take a stitch out of your lining fabric, and you're going to come back through the hole on the top, and I do about 3 or 4 stitches on each hole. Once your press stud is staying in place, you can then get it into the right place. You can then perhaps go through both sides at the same time, and then to travel from one to the other, I go through the lining only and move along to the next section, and then go through the hole on the other side on the next bit. Need a thin needle again for doing this bit, and then a bite of the lining fabric, and then through the next, that's the same hole. So I've got my thread double, and I'm doing about 3 stitches through each hole. My needle could probably do with being a little bit thinner actually. I'll change it for the next one. I've got a loop, so just make sure you've not got any loops. Just pull on your threads if you need to get rid of the loops. And it does get easier to hold your press stud in place. Just give it a wiggle if you need to as you move round. These are fiddly to do, there's no doubt about it. Then move on to the next one through underneath. So it's just going right underneath the button, look. Then through the hole in the press stud. Make sure you've not got any loops. And then take a bite out of your lining and through the hole again. Each time just make sure you've not got any loops on your threads, because once you've gone a couple of stitches past, it's hard to get those out. Whereas straight away they'll just pull straight out. That's it. Then pass away, go back through underneath, just make sure you're just through one layer. Just have a quick look on the other side. Yeah, that's fine. Because you're trying to make these invisible, aren't you, really, so that only you know they're there. And through the final hole. And then I'll do a long tail again like I did do once I've done a couple of stitches to hold this final hole in place. Oh, the needle doesn't want to come through. Sometimes you have to twist your needle to get it to right orientation for it to come through. Okay, and then when I want to cast off my stitches, I just travel back to one of the other holes and then back again and then back again, and that usually gives you enough of a hold on your thread so that it'll hold that stitches in, so you can't see any stitches underneath there. And then I travel back down through the thread. Make sure you're not gone through on the other side, and then you can put some tension on your threads and you come through. And then all you're going to do is just lap the other one over the top. Make sure the top of your dress is right, and make sure you've got your waist seam on your dress correct as well. So make sure that the waist seam is probably the most important one, because the collar will hide a bit of the back. And then stitch the other corresponding part of your snap on the other side, and then you'll be able to then attach that, and then we'll be ready to try it on to Clara. So let me just put my press studs on if you want to do the same, and then we'll meet back at our trying on stage and we'll have a little bit of a fashion show to see how our dresses are looking. Okay, so I've got my 2 sets of press studs sewn on that side, and then they can clip onto this side. They get hidden. Just fold the collar over. It's going to just stick up for a while until it's got itself into place. But there's our press studs. I've only just put the 2 on, and that's enough, I think, just to hold that closed. Obviously, if you wanted to put a third underneath the other button, then please go ahead and do so. But now it's time just for us to try our dress on. Let's take the that off. Let's just take your bonnet off for a second, Clara, just so that we can have a go with this. So let's pop that in over her head. And just take her arms. Sleeves are the perfect length and perfect width. So that's a sign of a fabulous pattern drafting. The bodice is lovely too. Fits really nicely. And that lovely collar on her dress. Just do you up then, Clara. Just doing the pressed up. They're just a little bit fiddly, aren't they? Just to get them into the right place. There's the back of the dress. Let's pull her collar down. So that sits all beautifully around her tummy as well, look. And look how beautiful she looks in her dress. Plenty of room there for the bonnet to go on and go round. Beautiful length for her as well, so we can see her bloomers underneath, but when she's actually standing, which she does beautifully well, look, then we can't see the actual bloomers at that point, just see her little toes. Let's just put her hat on, her bonnet, and tie her ribbon. She stands beautifully as well, doesn't she? I'm just going to put bonnet to that side. So I just need to do a big bow and then just reduce that size down a bit. It's a bit too big for her sizing. And then we can always trim the length of the ribbon, can't we, so it's not too long. So there she is. What do you think? Are you pleased with your dresses? Do you like the way that it's all come together? I think the fabric is fabulous, isn't it? That looks really sweet. Let's just turn you around, Clara, so we can see the back. And there's the back of her lovely dress with her 3 buttons just down the back there. Okay, let me turn the camera around and we'll do a roundup. So everybody, Clara has her dress. I hope that you're pleased with yours as well. I must say, I am really thrilled with the way that the sleeves have gone in and also the way that the collar is sitting really nicely. I know you can't see it so well with her bonnet on. Let me just take her bonnet off. Because Peter Pan collars have been a little bit of a nemesis for me because they are tricky and getting them to sit nice and prettily is a really difficult thing to do, but I feel that Claire and Richard have drafted these patterns so beautifully that looks really, really lovely on there. And it just needs a little bit of a press on the back corner just here. One's just slightly lifting, but it's just a pressing issue. It's not the actual stitching or design, but they really hug the shoulders really beautifully. So I hope you enjoyed stitching along with me today. If you have, please press the like button on the video. I'd really appreciate that because that really does help my channel. It helps YouTube know that you've enjoyed the video and that you think it's worthwhile watching, and then they push it out to more people. Leave me a comment if you're enjoying stitching along with me as well, because I'd love to know what you think to these characters and whether your dress has gone right for you or not. And also if you've struggled anywhere, then just drop me a line and I'll try and help you or try and describe anything else in greater detail for you. I'll get on to editing this video so I can upload it for you, and then the final part in Clara's outfit, the final bit, and she still stands beautifully, look, really, really well with that. Look, only one hand. So I'm thrilled with the way that she's freestanding as well. And digressing. But yeah, so onto the pinafore next, because that's our next stage, and then the whole outfit with her bonnet on will be absolutely complete. So thank you for watching today. I am hopeful that I might be able to do some other sew-alongs for some of the other Lily Rose dolls as well for the Apple Blossom Woodland collection. So if you have liked this and there's any that you'd like to see, then please do drop me a line and I will speak very nicely to Claire and Richard and see if they will allow me to bring you any more tutorials as well. Okay, from Clara and I, we will see you soon. Take care everybody, bye.